Okay, what I thought I would do with all of you is show you an example a little bit here of kind of what I was looking for with your Unit 11 DBQ paper. I know this was kind of your first opportunity in 8th grade anyway to do the DBQ writing process, and I just kind of wanted to go through with you some of the positives and negatives about papers that I read, kind of show you how these were graded, some common mistakes, and also some things that students did well. So first I'm going to review with you how I graded your paper, the 15 points total, and then I will be showing you a not so good example and a good example of some student writings to kind of let you see maybe what students did well, what students did poorly. Again, what I grade you on, out of the 15 points, 5 points were for the thesis and the theme of your paper. You had to explicitly state what your theory was and what your theme was, and you had to really develop that throughout the entire paper. Another 5 points were the examples cited from the documents. Remember, you had to have at least 3 examples cited. They had to be pertinent, which means they had to be important to what you were talking about. And then your spelling, your grammar, and multiple paragraphs. So the first one I want you to take a look at here, this is our not so good example. This student received a D. And so we'll go through this paper and I'll just highlight a few things to you about why this paper could have been a little bit better, and maybe give you guys an idea of how you can do better in the future. What were blacks? The student's title here is what were the blacks allowed to do and not allowed to do. So we start here. What was the blacks allowed to do and what were they not allowed to do compared to the whites? So first of all, this should be changed to what were the blacks allowed to, not what was. So this student's already getting graded down for spelling, grammar, etc. Because again, when you write a professional paper, you need to be sure you proofread it. I know that 8th graders absolutely hate proofreading papers. But if you proofread your papers, they're going to be better. So again, it really distracts from your writing when I can't get through it without there being some errors. We'll go from here. In New England, there was only one state, again this should be state, that would allow blacks to vote and be on male jury. Would this be on a male jury? Again, confusing here. And that Massachusetts, that is the only state that had both a yes in the for the voting and male jury duty. Again, a confusing sentence here. This entire thing really could be considered a run-on sentence, and again, it's very difficult for me to decipher and figure out what this person is trying to say. In Mid-Atlantic, there was no states that would allow the blacks to vote or go on jury duty. Also in the Midwest, there was none, and again this is the wrong use of there was none there either. Look at this sentence. Also in the Midwest, there was none there either. Again, confusing, difficult for me to follow. They were mostly restricted or no for both Mid-Atlantic and the Midwest. So the student finally uses document A, but again, I can't really decipher what they're trying to say. The blacks could do some things, but most of it they could not. Alright, this is a very common mistake that many of you made. You refer to as it. What is this it? Blacks could do some things. Well, what are the some things they could do? Could they vote? Could they serve on juries? Be specific. And so many of you did this, and it was difficult for me to understand what you were talking about. So as I looked at this first paragraph, again, spelling, grammar, that was really deterred, so obviously some points already marked off there. They did cite a document, but I couldn't really understand what they were trying to say with it. And then the thesis, the theme of the paper, I still don't know what it was. What was the blacks allowed to do and what were they not allowed to do compared to the whites? So this person never really makes a concrete statement of what their paper is all about. So right now their thesis grade is extremely low. All the blacks wanted from the whites was respect. No one would employ them. That's very true. Obviously, this person did have a good idea what was happening in the documents. White boys would not work with them. Again, who is them? Is them blacks? That's what I'm assuming, but again, spell it out for me. Show me that you understand. When you refer to these us's and thems and theys and we's, it's difficult for me to understand who you're talking about. So be very explicit and tell me exactly who you're discussing. But worst of all, no one would let them in their office because they are of a different race. Again, them's, their office, wrong use of their, they. Tell me who you're talking about. Or white clerks would talk to them. This would hurt, but all the blacks are asking for is respect for them. Are they, again, confusing. Can't understand it. Talk to them and employ them. So this person now cites Doc C. You can tell here that they're clearly talking about working conditions, which is, if I remember correctly, what document C is all about. But again, it's not explicit. I don't truly understand where they're going with this. So again, yes, they're citing the document, but I don't know what their thesis is. I have no idea what the theme of the paper is. Is it blacks allowed to do and what were they not allowed to do? No clue what's going on here. So again, using the documents, and clearly this person has an idea of what's happening here, but not a full understanding. The blacks almost think they are weak because no one will associate with them or even just simply talk to them. Again, if you're going to use this, great. I can tell this person has an understanding of what's going on, but really show me that you know by talking more in depth about it. And then our third paragraph here, the blacks were treated very different in the North and the South. Now this right here could easily be your thesis. The blacks were treated very different, but again, if you're going to do that, you would probably want to insert here the free blacks, because again, that was kind of what we discussed that these papers were going to be about. But if your thesis was the free blacks were treated very different in the North and the South, I think this could be a thesis, but again, you might want to say the blacks are treated very different in the North and the South, and maybe your second sentence, this might be better, would say something like, the blacks were treated very different in the North than in the South. In the North, the free blacks had, and then tell me about the free blacks. In the South, the slaves had, and then get into that. In the North, the whites said that we shall not make this black man a slave, we shall not sell him or buy him, but we cannot associate with him. This is obviously a quote from one of your documents, and it's a nice quote to include, but there's no documentation here. Alright, so even if this was the working theme of the paper, which now I'm going to assume it is, it's not, you're not telling me where you got it from, so I don't know where this quote comes from. So again, be sure that you're really listing those and making it explicit, really showing me what you know. Again, thesis, this is kind of a good start to a thesis. It's related to a thesis, but again, more specific, and this one should go up in the first paragraph as well. This person, starts their paper with their grabber with a question, but again, we can't understand the question as well. In the North, the whites said, so we have that one done. The blacks were not allowed to attend that much of anything in the North with the whites. Again, what is that much of anything? Be specific. The more specific that you can be for me, the more I know that you understand and the more points I can give you. Even though the whites shall not make the black man a slave, they shall have to pay taxes and perform duties. The blacks were not allowed to dine and drink with the whites, to attend them in their jury box, and they were not allowed to marry the whites' daughters. Again, this is basically a sentence here that was a direct quote from one of your documents, but there isn't a document listed. The blacks were not allowed to do anything pretty much in the North. Take out this pretty much or substitute it in. It doesn't sound very professional in the paper. But even though the white said that we shall not make the black man a slave, he still kind of was a slave because he had to pay taxes and perform certain duties, and they were not allowed to be on jury with them. Who's them? Only in one state. There's some good thoughts in here. There really are. But again, be more specific, and this is a huge run-on sentence. You're talking 1, 2, 3, 4 lines. And so it's difficult for me to remember what you talked about at the beginning of it. Why were the blacks treated so differently in the North than in the South? This could obviously, this might be better toward your thesis at the top of the paper as well. I say because the South had blacks longer than the North did. But even after the whites in the North didn't have slaves, they kind of treated black people like they were by not allowing them to do anything with or even associate with them. Again, I know this student, and this is with so many of you guys, I know that you understood some of the material, but you're not showing me exactly what you know, so I can't give you full credit. I believe this student received a D-. I think I probably gave him maybe a 2 out of 3 on the thesis. Probably a 3 here, so that was probably 5 points, and maybe 3 3.5. So maybe this was, I think maybe actually this was like an 8, 7.5, 8 for a total paper, which is maybe even below a D-. So again, just some common things that a lot of you did, and just ways to improve your paper. Now we're going to take a look at kind of a good example. This student I gave an A, and let's just look at the differences. The relative freedom of African Americans in the North. Do you remember when you were younger and you weren't allowed to do things because of something you couldn't control? It's a great grabber here. I think we can all relate to this sentence. You weren't allowed to ride certain roller coasters because you were too small. You had to sit at the little kids' table at holidays, even if you wanted to sit with the adults, all because you were too young to understand or they didn't want you to hear their adult conversations. This person does a great job. Again, this is very specific. So they're taking the question, and then they're giving us examples. Riding roller coasters, sitting at the little kids' table. These are things people can relate to. I was very hooked when I started reading this one. That's similar to the freedom of African Americans in the northern United States in the 1800s. They had rights, things they could do, but they couldn't do other things because of the pigment of their skin. They didn't have the same social, political, or economic freedoms that other Americans had. Right here, this is the thesis. African Americans in the United States, their freedoms. This person's saying, right here's their thesis, that these African Americans had rights. They could do, but they couldn't do other things because of their skin color. So this person's thesis, obviously, they had rights, but they were limited. Now this person's going to give me more specific examples. They didn't have the same social, political, or economic freedoms. And so this is where they're going to start. Their next paragraph, take a look. They talk about social. This is about social freedoms. The one after that, political. Political is listed here. So one tiny little difference that this person could do is they could switch around their political and economic, because economic comes right here. But still, they're kind of showing me their roadmap. They're showing me where they want to go with the DBQ. Let's start with social freedoms. Around 1858 to 1859, African Americans were allowed and could freely get a job, get married, and prosper. But they had very limited social freedoms. They could get married, but not to a white woman. They were allowed to be a representative in legislature or to be in the same concert. They were not allowed to be in a representative in legislature or to be in the same concert or lecture room with them. Document B. Now again, another common mistake. Who's this them? Alright? Them would be the whites. Then tell me that it's the whites. Still though, I can see where this person's going, and this is a correct way to document. The correct way to cite. They talk about all the things that document B said, and then they cite document B. They were not allowed, and again, these theys, this is something that a lot of you did. They were not allowed to attend to white people in hospitals or when they were sick. In fact, many of these restrictions were because white people thought African Americans, and there probably should be a were in here, were beneath them, and that they, black people, again, if you're going to use this they, you put these parentheses, now I understand who you're talking about, were inferior compared to them. Again though, too many uses of theys and thems, but correct documentation showing me that the student knows where things are coming from. Next are the economic freedoms. Economic freedom to me would be able to work with whomever and judge based on your ability to do the job and being able to have a source of income. Blacks could have a job, but white people did not hire them because they didn't want anything to do with them. Too many thems. Too many thems. As you can see by the social restrictions. It was difficult for African Americans to find work, so many didn't try in school. Why would they try hard academically when it wouldn't make any difference for the difficulty of finding work since white people wouldn't work with them? Document C. Again, this gives me the entire general idea of document C. And if a white person did hire them, the wages were definitely lower than another white person who works there. Again, giving me specific examples. Their political freedoms were very narrow as well. In 1860, only one state, and again, the student just lists, it's Massachusetts, had black male suffrage. The student showing me that they know the term suffrage, which is the right to vote. Again, showing me that they clearly understand what's going on. And the right that they could serve jury duty, document A. Very nicely done here. Specific, to the point, and citation is there. They were not allowed to be in Congress or participate in the judicial process of government, aside from jury duty in Massachusetts. This proves that even though the northern states were against slavery, they didn't see them as equals. Great here. They show that their freedom, they have freedom, but they're very limited and they're definitely not equal. Again, very specific. The student does a nice job. Worse, it was clear they didn't even think Again, be careful this day. And I think so many of you, maybe 90% of you, did this. Didn't even think African Americans were smart enough or should be allowed to vote for political officials. Did African Americans have rights in the 1800s? Did they have freedoms? Yes, they did. They had the right to own property, to have a job, to go to school, and to get an education, and to go to church and worship whomever they wished. But would you call this freedom enough? Compared to the freedom of white males and the freedom of women in America, I would have to graciously argue black people were not really free in the northern United States. They had very little social and political freedoms, and economic options for them were slim. So if I'm grading out this paper, spelling, grammar, this was a much easier paper to read. I'd probably go with 4.5 out of 5. You know, some minor things, but not bad. Documents were cited very well. Again, probably another 4.5 out of 5. You know, some of the examples were pretty good. So again, good here. And then the thesis, this person does a great job of telling me their thesis. You know, they had rights, but again, couldn't do other things because of the pigment of their skin. And then they give me the roadmap, tell me where they're going, and they successfully told me about the social, political, and economic freedom. So I'd probably give them a 5 here. So again, I'd probably go 5 here, maybe a 4 to 4.5 here. In the spelling and grammar, you know, you take out the theys, the thems, you know, and it probably would be a 5 here, but now probably 4, 4.5. So again, this is an A type of paper. Just things to consider for your next DBQ paper. Thanks for listening, and be sure that, you know, you really work on doing some of these things to improve your own papers. Have a good one.